So to create an asset listing which will then subscribe to using a calendar, so in other words outputting to an iCAL format, what we first need to do is create some dummy events. So I'm just going to create some single calendar events here. And let's do a wedding. Someone's wedding. Let's make it on the 10th of November at 10 AM, and it can run for 6 hours. And then we're going to want another one, calendar, single calendar event, and let's make this one a birthday. Good suggestion. Someone's birthday. Alright, let's make that on the 11th, and I'll make it at 10 PM. And it's going to be a late one, it's going for 5 hours. Okay, so now we want to list those two assets. So we'll just create a fairly standard asset listing page here. iCAL listing. And then just the very basic settings on the detail screen here. So I'm going to list a single calendar event. Set the root node to that site, and that should be all we need. So if we preview that now, yep, there we go. So we've got wedding, birthday, that's pretty standard. So it's not quite what we want though, because we want to be able to subscribe to this calendar in a calendar program. So what we then need to do is format our asset listing. The first thing we'll do is format the page contents. And I've mentioned it a few times in the book already that on the properties of a div, you need to set the presentation and the content type to raw HTML. And that's to ensure that we're not outputting any HTML, because if you don't do that, Matrix will put divs around everything, which obviously isn't going to work for our iCAL listing. So I'll just copy the code from the book into the page contents there. And then we'll do the same thing on the default format, body copy. So raw HTML, save, and I'll grab the code that we need. There we go. So we're looking at single calendar events, and we've got DT start is equal to event start time iCAL. So matrix actually gives you a proper keyword for iCAL formatted dates, the time it ends, and then the actual summary of the event. So that's pretty much all we need. Save that. And we're not quite there yet. Well, the last thing we need to do is create a separate design so we can trick the calendar programs into thinking that it's an actual calendar file rather than an HTML file. So we'll create that there. Call that one iCAL design, and edit the parse file. Again, I'll just copy the code that we need from the book. There we go. So it's pretty simple. The first line is just setting the content type to text text calendar. So that's just to, again, to trick the browser into thinking it's an iCAL file. And then we're just printing out the body, which will be what's in the asset listing. So we'll save that and apply the design to the iCAL listing. There we go. Now the last step is you probably want to make the asset listing and both the assets live. So what I'm going to do is just make the whole site live. The reason we need to do that is if you're using a calendar program, it's not going to have the authentication required for Matrix to log in. So there's a couple of ways you can probably get around that. You could allow, certain IPs, or you could use different authentication types. But, most of the time, if it's just a standard calendar, just make it live with public read permissions and you should be right to go. So what I'll do is just go to the web path screen. Just going to grab that URL, and then I'm going to go over to iCAL and calendar subscribe, paste in the URL. Aha! The data downloaded from is invalid. So at this point, we've obviously got a problem. So let's just push iCAL aside for a second. Now, it can be quite hard to diagnose the problem at this stage, because if you preview the asset listing, it's trying to open it up, and I guess we could try and pick an application. Let's just see how that goes. If we open TextMate, how's that gone for us? Right, okay. So here we go. Here's the file that we've just downloaded. So it's pretty hard to see what the problem is, but I've seen this one before, so I can tell you. We're missing a line break here. So we've got the first event starts right about there. Begin V event, DT start, DT end, summary, and that's actually where the first event ends. So what our problem is here is that we don't have a line break like that towards the next event. So what I'll do, if I just push that aside, is we'll go back to the default format, and all we need to do is just hit enter, and that'll create the line break that we need for each of the calendar events. And you'll see that on a couple of the other file formats as well, if you don't get the line breaks in the right spot, or even if you're doing a CSV file. If you get everything on the one line, that's all you need to do is just hit enter, and that'll create a line break for you. So let's try that again on the web path screen. Grab that URL again and try and find my iCal. There it is. Okay, so now we'll try it again. Calendar, subscribe, paste. Sweet, look at that. Perfect. So we'll just call this matrix test. Obviously pick the options that you want there. Probably want auto refresh to, every day or every week if it's an actual calendar that you're using. And there we go, there's our two events. So if we double click on it, we've got one from 10 AM to 4 PM and one to 10 PM to 3 AM. So that's a really great way, I guess, if you want to publish a calendar listing for your particular organization, different events that you have. People can subscribe to them through, Outlook or Apple iCal or, Google Calendar, whatever they want, and the events will just show up in this sort of format.